And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. What is there to say about what happened last night? I tortured myself by watching most of SONA. I didn't watch the pomp and ceremony beforehand, but and then I clocked off right when the so-called president started talking about foreign policy. But I got most of the substance, if one can call it that. But yeah, I mean, as before, general platitudes and nonsense obviously doesn't reflect the urgency that is needed to resolve South Africa's multifaceted crises. And I think the only moment, in my view, of unblemished honesty from Ramaphosa was when he said that we are far from where we need to be as a society, and then he carried on praising his own record for absolutely no good reason. And it struck me as I was watching that a real moment of statesmanship would have been for Ramaphosa to say, to record a video from the union buildings, from his office, saying that he doesn't really have anything to announce, that there's nothing new. The high speed trains, no progress is being made. The smart cities are kind of shanty towns, and that he does not want to insult our intelligence as South Africans by going and spending 7 million rand to have a gala evening at the Cape Town City Hall. That would have been a moment of statesmanship. That would have, I think, made South Africans sit back and say, wow, honesty from Ramaphosa. But of course, that's not what we did. We had a praise singer singing, doing a poem in praise of Ramaphosa, how great of a president he is, and then he spent an hour and a half telling us how South Africa has turned a corner. So yeah, I mean, what is there to say? David, what's your impression of SONA 2026? Are you impressed? Do you think our troubles are finally behind us?
Well, Martin, the reason I have a deer in the headlights expression on my face is because I, unlike you, did not watch the SONA. So that's my confession up front. So anybody who's expecting detailed, granular analysis from me on all of the intricate proposals and projects and initiatives that I assume characterized last night's speech, they're going to be disappointed. But I was actually at a breakfast talk this morning hosted by Mike Shan of State of the Nation. And I told Mike and the audience that his initiative, State of the Nation, is actually the real state of the nation. That last night's speech should be called the State of the State. And because, yeah, and the state is not in a very good state, I'm afraid. And one of the analogies I drew was Catherine the Great when she visited the Crimea in 1787. She was, and this was in the midst of a very devastating war in that part of the world. She was toured around by the local prince, Gregory Potemkin. And Potemkin, this is alleged, it's a bit apocryphal, this story. Whether or not it really happened is a matter of conjecture of history. But he built these elaborate facades that looked like a very beautiful, well-built village. But actually, it was just the front. It was the facade of the village. And what would happen is, as they were touring down the river on their boats, looking at these villages, as soon as Catherine the Great's boat would pass, they would dismantle the village, all of these basic wood cutouts, and then they would hastily go downstream and rebuild them again. And so Catherine the Great was very impressed by this, but it was a fiction. It was an illusion. It was smoke and mirrors. And that's kind of what the State of the Nation is like. There's all these elaborate projects, and look at how much we're going to spend on infrastructure, and you're going to have bullet trains, and the milk and honey will flow from heaven, and everything will be fine. But everything is not fine. And yeah, so the pageantry, the pomp, all of the money that gets put into it, it's very deliberate. It's to create the illusion of authority. And what I stressed to the audience during the Q&A I wasn't one of the featured speakers. I just was hogging the microphone as I'm doing now. But I was saying, listen, we need to actually start thinking beyond politics, because Moletsi and Becky, who was one of the speakers who gave a good address there, but he said, we actually need to vote for other people. And yes, you do need to vote for other people. But I said in response, actually, we need to start thinking beyond the ballot box. And the people in this room have actual power. And there is a contest, a political contest that needs to be had, but that's not necessarily an electoral contest. And so I think when we look at something like the State of the Nation, just bear in mind that this is all a projection. It's a fantasy. It's not really grounded in anything. So, we can discuss all of the proposals, as I'm sure we will today, but I think just bear in mind that this is all kind of nonsense on stilts.
Yeah, it's basically, it feels like Ramaphosa's wish list, if I'm honest. Ayanda, what's your take? Did you allow yourself to lose an hour and a half of your life that you'll never get back?
No, Martin. I did not lose 1.5 hours of my life. I also didn't watch, the pomp and the ceremony, much like you. In fact, I think if you read the national mood at this point, it is one of frustration, one of indifference. When you listen to most South Africans out there, you get the sense that after more than 30 years, after more than 3 decades, our politics in this country has become stale. That is to say, at this point, there's nothing that you haven't heard that has been said over the past 30 years. It's the same recycled promises, the same empty rhetoric about investment and, these massive projects which David spoke about. So you almost get a sense that no one believes what these politicians have to say. No one takes them seriously anymore, because what they're saying, from those lofty heights of punditry, doesn't align with what people see on the ground. On the ground, people are seeing decay. They are facing unemployment. There are service delivery challenges across the entire country. There's a water crisis currently in Gauteng, which I believe at a later point today we will discuss. So much like those South Africans, I wasn't too keen, because there's nothing that was said yesterday that I haven't heard over the past 30 years. I did have a chance to watch some of the things that the president said. And as I've said, these are all recycled promises and recycled statements. It was the usual script of going back and saying, we defeated apartheid, we managed to create this democracy that we have today. He reflects on the gains that were achieved, maybe in the first 10 to 15 years, but he doesn't have much to say about what went wrong, right? After that, how the party went mad, and how we moved off what I believe was a sensible trajectory, in terms of policy, the years in which we achieved growth. He doesn't really touch on that. It's the usual script of going back to the gains that we made in our democracy. So at the end of it all, you can't help but feel a little hopeless, because you can see that these are the same things being said over and over. Just one thing for now, because we will touch on the other things he mentioned. It was this deployment of the SANDF, right, to parts of the country which are being severely affected by crime, like the Western Cape, for instance. Now, there are two things there. Number one, look at the state of the SANDF. Some of our officers were deployed to the DRC not long ago. How did that mission turn out? What happened to them there? So the SANDF as it stands is in a bad shape, right? That's one aspect of it. But the second aspect of it is to say, does this actually solve the problem of gang violence, for example, in the Western Cape over the medium to long term? I don't think it does. I think what helps us to solve the problem over the medium to long term is to devolve policing powers in the country. This is something the Western Cape has been saying for God knows how long now, that this deployment of the SANDF is a short-term fix, and even then, that is debatable. What is going to solve the problem is to devolve policing powers, because I'm not sure whether to call him minister or not, because he's receiving a salary, but he's not really minister. But Senzo Mkhunu, when he was at the Matlanga Commission, he acknowledged himself that the state doesn't have the capacity. He said, we don't have the machinery to fight gang violence in the Western Cape. That is an admission on the state's end that they don't have the capacity to fight crime. And how do you expand the capacity to fight crime? You devolve policing powers, because once you devolve policing powers, each and every province across the country can establish its own policing unit with its own crime infrastructure, with its own personnel. And that is how we gradually begin to push back, against crime in the country. But I don't see how deploying the SANDF solves anything. It is just a matter of optics for me. We need real policy reform, and that is what we're going to speak about, of course, today. We need real policy reform. We need to move away from the centralized approach, because fundamentally the issue here is the centralized approach to policing, but there are also many other issues as well where centralization is a problem. So those are just my immediate thoughts. I think, once again, we have a lost opportunity for reform. The president has not said anything new. You get a sense that we are moving around in the same circles. Our politics has become stale. We're hearing the same things over and over. We're hearing promises of investment, infrastructure development, but then again, you're not seeing those changes on the ground. People have lost confidence because they're not seeing those things on the ground. It's almost as if you're speaking about a country which doesn't exist at all. So for me, from where I'm standing, my initial thoughts, there's no reason to be hopeful about anything that the president said yesterday.
Yeah, well said. About crime, like we've deployed the SANDF before, if memory serves, specifically in this role, and that, anyone remembers that the SANDF was deployed to help with law enforcement during lockdown. I saw troops at coffee shops once or twice during lockdown, but I never got the impression that they were actually kind of out in force, except when they were killing Colin Scoza, of course. Then they were kind of ready to work, but kind of enforcing lockdown kind of across the board was never really something that the SANDF was inclined to do. So yeah, this is an optics game. When the heads of state start saying I'm deploying the army, like Donald Trump has done in immigration enforcement and so on, people are like, wow, something is happening here. And that's what Ramaphosa is trying to go for. Obviously, it will change nothing. Everything he said about law enforcement was the same kind of things that every ANC president has said before during their State of the Nations. It said nothing about devolution, as he rightly said. And the most insulting part of it was that the man, in virtually the same breath, he acknowledged that, wow, there's been shocking reports that the highest echelons of the SAPS are involved in criminal syndicates, as Daily Maverick reported a few weeks ago. And then he says we're going to ask the SAPS to investigate itself and to prosecute itself. I mean, come on. Seriously, the same people, like he referred to kind of the anti-corruption units and so on. The State Security Agency, in fact, they're going to re-vet all of the senior SAPS generals and so on. It's like they're vetting their friends. These people are all part of the same elite. What are you talking about? So I mean, it's on law enforcement, the sense of urgency just isn't there. I mean, some other standout things that he said we're in a stronger position today than we were a year ago because the rand has strengthened against the dollar, celebrating the US dollar weakening rather than the South African rand actually strengthening. He celebrated our consecutive kind of quarters of growth. And now what he calls growth are all below 1%. The last time we had over 1% of growth was right after the COVID lockdowns when the economy kind of was allowed to breathe again. But we haven't had more than 1% of growth really in quite a while. He celebrated expanding social grants again because, of course, he did. That is something that the GNU, the ANC GNU, is very keen on, is keeping people dependent on the state. He said South Africa is dealing with state capture, and the example he used for why we're now dealing with state capture is that SARS is back on its feet and it's going after tax evaders. That is how we're dealing with state capture. Wonderful. A funny moment to me was when he said, "Well, the GNU has now been here for 2 years, and kind of it shows that people from all walks of life across the political spectrum can come together and work together." And it's like, yeah, actually, the GNU is just the ANC dictating to their weaker, much less politically adept partners. That's what the GNU is. So, kind of celebrating that is it's a very Machiavellian moment. I mean, he kind of co-opts the opposition, and then he says, "Well, look at this. We're working together." Very shrewd politician. Very worryingly on law enforcement. He kind of, if you read between the lines, committed South Africa to do civilian disarmament. He said that they're going to strengthen firearm legislation. That's very worrying. So I would encourage anyone listening here to follow Gideon Joubert on Apparatus on X. He's kind of leading the charge with many firearms organizations against the new firearms amendment legislation that's back in the pipeline. Yeah, everyone clapped when Ramaphosa said there will be no impunity for corruption anymore in South Africa. At the biggest gathering of the corrupt, maybe every year, is SONA, is the biggest gathering of the corrupt. A funny thing that kind of started before the SONA began was that he instructed the Minister of Water and Sanitation and the Minister of COGTA, Cooperative Governance, to attend to the water crisis in Johannesburg. Now, I'm not sure what two politicians are going to do when the problem is just leaking pipes, but apparently Ramaphosa announced at SONA that it's now solved, it's over, it's done. They've solved the leaking pipes. I was taken aback when he said that because he just 2 hours ago told his ministers to attend to it. So, I mean, is this the magic of politics? I don't know. It seems like it. We're getting a water task force. Wonderful. A white paper on local government. Now that should send shivers down everyone's spines. That's coming in the next year or two. It's a local government election year. And I want to ask our audience, who wants to bet that this white paper is going to be about centralizing power? I mean, he alluded to that. He said that there's fragmentation amongst municipalities, so we're going to defragment, and that's probably going to bring back this old idea of district development model. An interesting concession that he made that made me excited for a split second, and then he lost it, was that he said that never again will South Africa be reliant on a single supplier of electricity, because that was a problem. That's a problem with Eskom. So we're now decentralizing the risk with private sector participation. What a insane, wonderful concession by the president of the ANC, and then he immediately went into rail and said that the state will retain ownership of all railways in South Africa, even though the private sector is now allowed to invest. Kind of in certain areas and get concessions. More subsidies for small businesses, more state job programs. NHI is still on the agenda. As he admits, the dilapidated state of public health care. They're appointing 10,000 additional labor inspectors when they should be cutting the state workforce by orders of magnitude. And he believes that legislation will professionalize the public service when it's a cultural issue. So those are kind of the standout things for me. And then just, of course, I know you guys discussed this last week, but yeah, Ramaphosa said that he kind of batted a little bit for John Steenhuisen. He said that the state is behind Steenhuisen on the central mismanagement of the foot and mouth disease for cattle, and that there will be no decentralization or privatization of giving that privilege to cattle owners themselves to vaccinate their cattle. And he used COVID-19 as some kind of analogy to say that we needed SAPRA back then to centrally administer the vaccines. Look how wonderful that turned out. And we can. This is the same situation. We have to have the state doing it centrally. And the camera immediately went to Steenhuisen when Ramaphosa was saying this, and he was like, "Yeah, great." So that's the state our GNU is in. Big celebration of more state, more spending, more regulation, more control, with the usual kind of offhanded references to they'll be cutting red tape as he's asking the provinces to regulate alcohol businesses far more strictly. So, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is, as David says, kind of this is the irrelevant circus that is playing out in South Africa right now. We really all shouldn't care about this. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, but no, we don't care. But the point is, we need to care about other things. Like, these are the people who are dragging the country down, and we need to find ways to pull the country up. And we need to find ways to make all of this nonsense irrelevant, because there is gonna be spending that flows out of this. There is gonna be regulation that flows out of this, and we should all make an effort individually, as families, as communities, to make all of this as irrelevant as we possibly can. That means, yes, voting for other people. I know Maletsi Mbeki is keen on that, but if you ask me, that pool of available people to vote for who sit kind of outside the GNU, that's a very tiny pool. I'm not sure myself if voting for the DA is necessarily a good idea anymore. Solly Benlatsi wants to regulate podcasts. Now he even wants to bring in this age verification thing that's happening around the world, to ensure that social media is completely de-anonymized. That won't be abused on the African continent, I'm sure. Dean McPherson, pro EWC, Siviwe Garuba is pro kind of central kind of control of education. She's kind of bought into the ANC's type of education policies. Very little room for innovation. Freedom Front Plus, they spoke a good game afterwards, rejecting SONA, saying all the right things, but they're still there in the GNU, still implementing fundamentally ANC policy. So yeah, I'm not sure if that voting harder, voting for different people is necessarily going to solve the problem. So David is completely correct. There's a lot of work that needs to happen outside the state. We need to claw back power from the state. And then at that point, the formal politics can start reflecting a better, already changed reality. But I'm not sure that we'll change reality through voting. David, anything that stood out to you from that summary that I gave of all the various things Ramaphosa thinks are good?
Well, I think what stood out to me was the theme that Ayanda alluded to, which is of more and more centralization. So, it's like, sorry, guys, we failed you as a centralized state, but the answer is more centralization, and we'll do it better this time. And yeah, I was just taking a glance at News 24's coverage. Don't hate on me for reading the mainstream press. But, one of the things that Ramaphosa said, let me just find the quote now. He says, if a municipality is not willing or able to provide a service to its residents, it must be done by another structure that can. These changes may be difficult, but they must be done. Yes, Cyril, I absolutely agree with you. We should take it away from the politicians and give the administration of our towns and cities over to residents associations, ratepayers associations. Those are the people who are on the ground, close to the issues. They're the ones who can do it. But I'm afraid to disappoint you that what Mr. Ramaphosa actually means is when municipalities fail, we will strengthen, and I'm quoting, the ability of national government to intervene more quickly and to direct corrective measures in the interests of serving our people better. So I think it's getting it back to front. I think if you consider the water issues that are facing the city of Johannesburg at the moment, places like Midrand, Melville have been without water for days, weeks at a time. And there's plenty of centralization there with Rand Water and Joburg Water and so on. But those functions are failing. And one of the other speakers at today's breakfast was Mighty Jamie. And, Mighty Jamie was saying, oh, well, look in the UK where they've privatized some of their sewage works. And actually there's been breakdowns and there's, sewage flowing into the clean water. And isn't this terrible? I'm like, Jamie, look around you, my friend. We're in, state-led development of water systems. They are literally, the taps are running dry. We have photographs of Helen Ziller sitting knee-high deep in a pothole, which looks like a little pond. And I thought that was very effective campaigning, by the way. But what's happening here? It's not exactly a status paradise. It's not a good example. And even somebody, I think it might have been Jamie, he said, we need to look at the Mamdani model. We need a Mamdani moment in South Africa, he said. And I was like, my friend, look around you again. Every municipality has their own Mamdani, and the Americans are importing the South African model.
Yeah,
of
we
government.
are the Mandami model. Mandami
Yeah.
is basing him on South Africa.
Yeah, but that's where he picked up some of his worst ideas, I would argue. So yeah, now New Yorkers are feeling the warmth of collectivism, which implies mounds of trash growing on the side of the streets, and I'm sure they'll experience some water issues in the not too distant future as well. So yeah, so I just in a final comment from me, I wrote a piece yesterday before I'd watched the SONA for my weekly column for The Common Sense. And I argued that fixing South Africa is simple but not easy. That's the title of the piece. So viewers of this live stream might think, oh, we're a terribly cynical bunch. We just love moaning about the president, and there's nothing to be done to turn South Africa around. And that's not true. There is plenty of opportunity here. So my piece was a bit of a meandering piece. So I essentially argued, listen, we're inflicting wounds on ourselves here through our policy choices. So something like unemployment is a choice. We've got a youth dividend in South Africa when most of the world is experiencing population collapse, but half of these young people are sitting at home without a job. So the FMF's proposal, institute a job seekers exemption certificate, bypass all of these hostile regulations and laws like the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the National Minimum Wage Act, let people freely contract their labor with willing employers. And then I also spoke about the vast mineral endowment that we have in South Africa. Moletsi Mbeki this morning was saying that South Africa has 54 different kinds of minerals. We have mountains of coal, which is great for powering our energy needs, our coal-fired power stations. We have uranium, we have gold, which is in high demand these days. We've got platinum reserves. I think anywhere between 78 and 88% of the world's known platinum reserves are in this country. The rest is in Zimbabwe and a bit in Russia as well. So these are huge strategic advantages that we have, but politics gets in the way. So I mentioned in my piece that Gwede Mantashe was at the mining Indaba. This is an annual jamboree of mining investors and commodity traders and politicians attend as well. And he was on a panel with his counterpart from the Democratic Republic of Congo. His name is Louis Watum Kabamba. And the Congolese have struck a critical minerals deal with the Trump administration in America. And they're willing to do business. They're willing to trade. And look, I don't want to be rude to our Congolese friends, but the DRC is not exactly a model of good governance and a successful state. But even the Congolese have a sense of their own national interest. Yeah, they might have some corruption there that is driving some of this. But, they're willing to strike a deal with the Americans. What's wrong with us? And our Communist Minister of Mining, Mantashe, was saying, hey, why are you doing this? You're acting in your national interest, but you should be acting in the continental interest. Oh, give me a break. Like Gwede Mantashe acts in the continental interest. So that's just another example of how policy gets in the way of the abundant opportunity. And, mining has the potential to be a great driver of growth and prosperity in this country. It's what built our industrial capacity in the first place. It's the backbone of our economy, but it requires capitalists, big capitalists, to be able to invest here. And I mentioned to one of my contacts earlier today, it's time for the big capitalists to start throwing their weight around in South Africa and start getting government out of the way of what could be a highly prosperous and successful mining industry. So the solution, as I argue in my piece, keep it simple, I shared an excellent graphic, which I'm hoping our host Martin will show, that appeared on our social media channels. And we at the FMF spend a lot of time speaking about and analyzing laws and legislation. We do legal and economic analysis in defense of freedom. And where we take our work seriously, we are very diligent in the execution of our research and advocacy. But ultimately, the solutions are pretty simple. Like, you don't need to be a policy wonk to understand this stuff. Like, the graphic that our marketing team shared spoke about 5 reforms that South Africa needs: reduce the size and costs of government, protect private property rights and the rule of law, ensure monetary stability and central bank independence, have free trade, open markets, cut red tape and unnecessary regulations. It's not rocket science, and all of the pageantry, like we were talking about earlier, it's all designed to make you think like government is this hugely complicated thing, and only us, the anointed ones, the politicians in Pretoria who control this vast bureaucracy that extends over the land, only we can tell you how to run this complicated beast called the government of South Africa. But actually, it's a distraction, it's a ruse to make you think that this is more complicated than it needs to be. The complicated bit is the politics itself. How do you get the politicians out of the way? That's what we're really trying to do here. And it means you can't just provide analysis, you can't just do recommendations. You actually have to be engaged in the fight for these values, for liberty. It's not going to happen naturally. You need to make it happen.
Yeah, no, well said. The power kind of has to be in our hands. The politicians certainly aren't going to solve the problem. Well, firstly, because they don't really see it as a problem. They see our dependency and their control as a good thing. So we have the more people understand that, and that we are the ones perceiving a problem, they're seeing everything falling into place the way they want it to. Maybe that will engender a sense of urgency amongst ordinary South Africans to start taking the power back. Ayanda.
Yeah. I think those are very good comments from David there, right? In terms of the kind of policy reform that we need in South Africa. But I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, on this very platform where it was Zakes, Martin, and myself, and we were having a discussion around the foot and mouth disease outbreak, and what an effective response should look like. And one of the points I raised was that there is an argument to say that this should not be a centralized process, and there's both an ethical and a practical argument for that. On an ethical level, it is to say that this livestock as an individual is your property. It doesn't belong to the state. This is your property. And there shouldn't be anyone who tells you that you cannot vaccinate your own livestock. These are your cows. You feed them. You are responsible for their upkeep and whatnot. And so from an ethical perspective, at least for me, it makes no sense to say that I can't vaccinate my own cattle. This is my property. If you're denying me the right to vaccinate my own cows, what you are suggesting is that these aren't my cows, or this isn't my property. But from a practical point of view, it is to say, waiting for a state to administer the entire process, a state we all know is incompetent, is under-resourced, lacks the capacity on many issues. From a practical point of view, is not a smart decision, because that actually slows down the entire process. What is going to accelerate the process is to allow some kind of participation from farmers themselves and from other actors in society. So the point that I'm getting at is that for the president yesterday to declare this a national disaster while not changing the approach, or while not changing the response that should, right, that we should adopt to this outbreak, I think for me doesn't help. And it goes back to what I said earlier on, that the entire address doesn't inspire any confidence, because we're not moving away from the approach which has created many of the issues that we see. whether it is education, whether it is national security, as we've seen, whether it is now with the FMD outbreak. Because even on the education thing, you can make an argument and say this centralized approach to education isn't an effective approach. You have this highly centralized one-size-fits-all education system where we have abysmal outcomes every year. You have more than 50% of the learners who enter the system in grade R not writing their matric. And with those who get to matric, at least another, 60% of them get abysmal results and they can't even qualify for tertiary education. And you find yourself asking, why aren't we moving away from this kind of approach? Because we know that it doesn't work. So I think to highlight the issues, but then to not attend to the underlying approach, which we have moved along for the past 30 years, is a problem. As David has correctly noted, at the Free Market Foundation, there is no shortage of solutions. I think anyone who's going to argue that we moan without proposing solutions is either unaware of those solutions or is simply being dishonest. I mean, our Liberty First initiative, the points which you've just pasted here, Martin, are very important to say that if we want to turn this country around, if we want to start moving in the direction of growth, prosperity, and creating employment for people, then there are certain structural reforms. And this is an important point, structural reforms, because people like Moeletsi are going to make an argument which isn't entirely invalid to say that we need to vote for different people. But if you're going to vote for different people and they don't dismantle the centralized infrastructure that we have in place, then you still don't solve the problem. You actually need to elect people who are going to dismantle the kind of infrastructure we have in place. This kind of politics where we are attracted to personalities or to individuals is also a problem, because individuals are not going to fix the problem. What is going to fix the problem is systemic reform, downsize cabinet, downsize government, right? Because once you do that, you free up more resources that can be deployed productively by people into the economy. I happen to think that people are far better managers of their money than the government. So if you tax people less, that's more disposable income for them in their pockets, right? If you deregulate, right, that's you trying to actively solve the employment problem, because we would know that most of these young people, and this is something which Zex pointed out in his JSEC paper, most of these young people could benefit from this kind of work. Why aren't you deregulating? JSEC allows you to do that. David not long ago produced a brilliant paper on sound money and on how Bitcoin, right, can act as a hedge, right, against inflation and other things which he mentioned. So those are the kinds of reforms, Martin, that you need in the economy. If we're going to adopt this position of simply saying, let's change faces or let's change personalities, I don't think we solve the problem. All of us know how that kind of politics has turned out. The current president himself is a good example of why that kind of approach doesn't work. And there's now noise around Mr. Mtsepe. I'm not sure whether he's going to contest. But there again, we have the same problem of thinking that personalities are going to solve the problem when what is going to solve the problem is systemic reform. We need to have the right systemic reforms in place, and that is going to solve the problem. You need to have a legal system which guarantees the protection of private property rights. Because again, there you can make an ethical and a practical argument to say that property rights are a cornerstone of economic prosperity. The proof is in the pudding. Countries which protect private property rights tend to perform better economically. But property rights are also a cornerstone of human dignity, right? Because a human is a human because they can have something which they call their own. So those are the kinds of reforms that you need in this country. But of course, the president did not go anywhere near those kinds of reforms. And that is why I keep saying that for me personally, the address doesn't inspire any confidence. For the past 30 years, we have been moving around the same circles. And if we do not stop moving around the same circles, the country is going to ground to a halt. This idea that we're turning around is simply not true.
Yeah, well said. I think the key thing kind of that I get from that, Ayanda, is, so if you look at John Ciena's, and I'm obviously going to be picking on the DA, that's kind of what I do. But this is a guy who I believed, and maybe I still believe, that he actually does believe in kind of decentralization and liberalism. Kind of, if you get him in a bar or something and you sit down with him, he'll say, "Yeah, we need to decentralize. It's important, and property rights are good. Free enterprise, privatization." That's probably what you'll get from John Steenhuisen. But he spent and we've now discovered, so Salkeliga, Sai, and Free State Agriculture, they said they looked at existing South African law, and they do not think the government has any right in law to deny to farmers the right to vaccinate their own cattle. They asked Steenhuisen, "Why are you denying it? Show us the provision," and he couldn't. He could not. What he did do was that he said, "Oh, it's the International Food Animal Health Society or something, the World Organization for Animal Health. They require the state to do it." And then a week after he said that, the World Organization for Animal Health came out and said, "Actually, no, you can do it any way that you want. Please don't put that on us." They came out and they said that. And now suddenly, it's not the law that requires it, and it's not international kind of convention that requires it. So why is he doing it? Why is he centralizing? Why is the DA federalist centralizing vaccinations? Well, because that's how it's always been done. That's the system. That is what he found when he walked into the office of the minister. He walked in there, the advisors, the lawyers, they said, "Minister Steenhuisen, this is how we do it." And he said, "Cool, so that is how we will do it." You cannot hope to reform South Africa away from the complete malaise that we have here. Not Malay, we want Malay. Malaise. From the malaise that we have, if those are the people, those are the personalities that you put there, they defer completely to the status quo. David often speaks about the status quo bias issues with the GNU. And in this specific example, it's not the GNU, it's the Minister of Agriculture, who is not required by law to centralize, it's not required by international convention to centralize. He just did it because that is how it's done. And he is fighting tooth and nail in court now to make sure that that position wins at the end of the day. And the whole DA is behind him. Make no mistake. Like, they are completely behind him because he is their leader, not because he is doing the right thing. So you won't have structural reform. And if you just vote for people who you think might agree with you, but who are going to just defer to what they find in office. And we've seen many examples of this. 2 years, 3 years after Chris Pappas was elected in Ngeni, doing a great job by all accounts, he still sat in interviews complaining about how legacy staff are undermining his agenda. It's like, my guy, why did you not fire these people? Well, he walked in, he said, "I would like to fire some people," and some lawyer, some random lawyer said, "Mr. Mayor, you can't do that." You see, when your politician is like that, like so deferential to the status quo, then you're in trouble. Because I'm sure, and I promise you, when Javier Milei walked into the office of the president and he said, "This is what I want to do," I promise you, lawyers said, "Mr. President, you cannot do that." What did he do? He said, "Get out of my office. I do not want to see you again." And he muted them on WhatsApp. That is what you do when you're truly reforming. You say, "I'm going to reform, and then I'll deal with the consequences." Malay's been in court. Malay has been attacked by the Argentine Congress. He's lost some elections. He's lost some of these battles. But he lost the battle because he started a battle. Are our reformist politicians starting battles? I don't think so. Now, I'm not going to be completely dismissive. They did win the VAT battle, but that's old news now, ladies and gentlemen. We can't keep milking that cow. Like, they did it, they won. We need to move on to the next thing now. EWC is still on the agenda. Ramaphosa spent a big chunk last night speaking about how NHI is coming. That is still on the agenda. They were celebrating apparently our highest pass kind of matriculation rate ever for the matric class of 2025. Still on the 30% pass rate, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness, what are we doing? And we have a Minister of Basic Education who is from the Democratic Alliance. So, yeah, Ayanda, I think you're completely correct. This is a fundamental structural issue. And that means when we look at solutions, it cannot be about um, fiddling around the edges. It cannot be about appointing better police officers. It cannot be about appointing better teachers. It cannot be about getting non-corrupt people into office. Obviously, that goes without saying. When we pick people to go into office, they should not be corrupt. That goes without saying. But that is not a solution. That is just how it works. You don't put a corrupt person in office. So that is not a solution, even though many people like to present it as such. We have a fundamental issue in South Africa, and it's not a problem with the constitution. I think a lot of our listeners here on Rational Standard will say, you're right, it's a structural issue. We have to abolish the constitution. Maybe we should abolish the constitution. I don't think that is necessary for structural reform. The constitution is a framework document that sets very bare bones minimum standards. Most of the stuff that this government is doing, most of the structures that this government has created to abuse the people, to abuse the economy, are things that can simply be abolished, can simply be done away with. There is no need for a Department of Labor, even in South Africa. There is no constitutional need for that. Yes, there are labor provisions in the constitution. That doesn't mean we need a whole bureaucracy to enforce them. We can have a small unit in the SAPS that says if employers engage in kind of abusive behavior towards their employees, you need to go and deal with that. You can do that. That's constitutionally compliant. You can do that. So, as David's article says, the solutions are simple. It's not easy. You need political will for this. If you're an opposition politician, you need to be willing to get into trouble, to get into big trouble, to get into fights. We don't really have that yet. I mean, sure, there are some people. Rob Hersov is a good example. He's someone who likes to make trouble, but he's not anywhere near being a formal politician. So we have a set group of people in politics. Many of them are very good, high caliber individuals, but they lack, like I've always said, that Machiavellian spirit, that willingness, not willingness, my goodness, no, eagerness, that excitement to go and fight, to say, listen, I've now been put here. I am the Minister of Agriculture. I've been put here by DA voters in line with a DA manifesto, in line with DA values. And I am going to just do the federal thing. If Ramaphosa wants to fire me, that's his prerogative. He can fire me. That needs to be the kind of the posture that opposition politicians, regardless of party, need to take. And as I said on Pumlani Majozi's show earlier this week, that is something that our opponents do have. Our opponents have that posture. Like, don't think for a second that if Julius Malema was made the Minister of Finance or something, that he's now going to defer to the lawyers, to the advisors, and so on. He is going to do exactly whatever he wants. And yeah, maybe he'll get fired for that, but he'll be fired with a big smile on his face, because that'll play into his values and the value proposition that he presents to his voters. Being fired for him will be a good thing. Our people need to see it as a good thing. If you get martyred for doing the right thing, that is political gold. You have struck political gold. And I will always go back to the Trump meeting. If John Steenhuisen threw Ramaphosa under the bus in view of the whole world's cameras, he would be a rock star today. This guy would have been the self-anointed king of opposition in this country for a decade. He couldn't even muster the eagerness, the willingness to do that. It's hard. It's hard, but it's necessary, and that's the only way to get out of this. You cannot pull South Africa out by implementing ANC policy better than the ANC. It's just not going to work. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give each of my two colleagues here a moment for a last word, and then I will close it up for us. David.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, just a comment on status quo bias. I mean, I find it really fascinating because South Africa is not the only country that suffers from this. I mean, if you look at the United Kingdom, for example, which is going through some pretty serious economic challenges, and nobody in the political establishment there wants to talk about the NHS. It's like almost like a ring-fenced issue. Like you won't see a Conservative Party or a Reform Party person, talking about, oh, we need to like downsize the NHS. But they need to confront reality. They need to slaughter some holy cows there. And when you look around the world, really the only leader who is prepared to do some afuera, as one of the people were commenting in the comments, was that one of 44. You know, that's really where the action is. And you just have to look with astonishment and envy at what Millet is doing. He's cut state spending by 30%. He has completely eliminated the budget deficit for the first time in 125 years or something. And that's pretty extraordinary. And he also did that. There's a different political system, yada, yada, yada. I know all the caveats. But he did that without a parliamentary majority. He did that through decree. And so that's the kind of political Machiavellianism, the boxing smart that we're trying to advocate. So, yes, you are constrained by the institutions, by politics. You don't want to get fired from your ministry. We get it. But like your job there is not just to keep the seat warm. Your job is there to disrupt the system. Like if you think of basic education, it's like that is not a system that is working, folks. Like that needs to be, you need to be like having fights with SADTU every day. And it needs to be in the headlines. Teachers on strike. Like minister removes privileges from teachers' unions, and they're burning their textbooks on the pavement outside the school because they're so angry. You know, so like we need a lot more conflict. And I think maybe this is a cultural thing in South Africa. Like, you know, we obviously have a lot of violence and things like that, but actually South Africans are kind of conflict averse in a way. It's like, well, no, you can't say that. You can't be rude to the trade union members. Well, yes, you can actually, because the future of your children's education is at stake. There's the stakes are high here. So yeah. So I think, you know, John Enders from the Institute of Race Relations, he often talks about this idea of a punctuated equilibrium, that things carry on at a certain rate for a very long time, and then some event happens that changes it. And there's a big disruptive event, and then things change and it settles on a new equilibrium. And yeah, there's that Vladimir Lenin quote that I always missay, but it's something like, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are years where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen, I think is the quote. And yeah, so many people thought that May 2024 was such a punctuation point, but maybe actually that punctuation point is still coming, and that was merely a data point along the way, a milestone, because really, and I think this goes to the core of some of our criticism of the GNU, is that maybe, like Moeletsi and Becky explained this morning, the DA essentially bailed out the ANC. The electorate rejected the ANC, actually. And the DA said, no, come back. We like you. These were Moeletzi's words. So, yeah, maybe this was more of a delaying of the inevitable punctuation of the equilibrium rather than a change in itself. But maybe that's a discussion we can continue on a future pod. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, David. No, I agree. Well said. Ayanda.
Thanks, Martin. Just, I think my final comment, and I think this is what David is getting at here. This goes back to a column he wrote on the DA's alternative to BEE. I think it's the Inclusion for All bill, or something to that effect. Yeah, but this is their alternative to BEE, which they tabled last year, I believe, by their head of policy, Matt Cuthbert, if I'm getting his name wrong. But the point which David made in that column is simple. It's like, dude, if you don't agree with BEE, in those parts of the country where you have power and you preside over departments, just implement your alternative. Just do it. Disrupt the system, as David said. Now, until such a point or a time when they can actually muster the courage to do that, and yes, there are constraints, as David has said, there will be pushback and challenges. But until such a time when those who have been elected, who have been entrusted by the electorate to deliver on certain things, until they can arrive at a point where they muster the courage to do those things and to implement those alternatives which they have tabled themselves. I think those of us who are in civil society, at the Free Market Foundation, and many other actors in civil society have a responsibility to build something outside the state, because this is where I am trying to move towards. I am trying to say that the Sokalichas of this world, for example, which litigated against this push to centralize the process, these are all important organizations in society. We need more of them. We need people to start building alternatives outside the state, which is why the work that some organizations like Solidarity, AfriForum, etc., people may have their own views on these organizations, but these people are actually showing us what communities can do for themselves outside the state. I had the opportunity just this past holiday in December, because my mother's also a teacher at a high school in a rural area. And one of the things which they are doing in that school, which I thought was amazing, it was an amazing initiative. And this is something basic, but it meant so much to me. There's a teacher in that school who literally bought a hair cutting machine. And what he does for the poor students, right? Because this is a school which is attended mostly by children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. What he does for those students is that every week on a Friday, he cuts the hair of those students. He literally clears the space in his classroom and he cuts their hair for free at no cost. Now you may ask me, why does that matter? It matters to me because you have someone who is trying to make a positive difference in the community which they find themselves in, with the benign thing like hair cutting. Now, if you were to take that and put it in another context, or extend the logic which underlies the kind of act, to say why can't teachers in the school, or even ex-students who come from that school, why can't they dedicate an hour every week? I mean, I do it myself to the high school which I went to. When I'm at home during the holiday season, I go back to the high school I went to and I tutor learners there with English and history. Why can't you dedicate an hour every week? I'm sure you aren't that busy. An hour every week to go back to the school that you went to. It doesn't have to be about money. This is not about money. It's about giving your time to students at that school, tutoring them, helping them with their work. I think if we can cultivate that kind of culture in society, to say it is important for you to plow back into the community you come from, or to do something positive for the people where you come from, we can actually begin to make progress as a country. Because I often get the sense that some people don't want to get their hands dirty, right? They're like, let the government do that. Let the government take care of that. It's like, if you're going to leave that to the government, if you're going to leave that crater, which is in front of your yard, to your local municipality, no one is going to fix that thing. You have to do something about it, because your cars drive on those roads. But the point I'm getting at here is, we need to stop outsourcing everything to government, everything to the state. Where we can, in our personal capacities, let us try to do something. And my argument is that the ripple effect of that will be positive. If we have more teachers like the teacher at my mom's school who does something for learners there, if that spreads across the country over time, that leads, or something which can change people's lives at a material level and fundamentally, we need to stop assuming that the government is going to come and fix everything for us. I think those are just my final comments. We need to get our hands dirty in society. It's very important for us to do that.
Well, yeah, that is a very powerful point. And I mean, if people have been on X recently, you'd have seen that a lot of foreign European and American accounts have taken a big interest in this Josie versus Josie account that is sharing images of Johannesburg 15 years ago and Johannesburg today. And a lot of people are I want to say everyone is reflexively saying, look at what municipal and government collapse is doing. And it strikes me. I mean, I'm a libertarian. For me, the state is the big evil in society. So I'm not kind of batting for the state here. But it strikes me that that is such a denial of complicity of ordinary people that it's actually unhealthy, because these areas, these places that are being photographed, they're not kind of in a vacuum. It's like there's a like an apartment building. People live here. Like there's individuals living here. Why are they not cutting that overgrown grass? Why did they not go to the hardware store and buy some bricks to fill that crater that is now formed in the sidewalk? Why is that not happening? Well, I said that people have stopped caring. And the moment you stop caring is the moment collapse follows. It's already difficult to get the state to provide services. But if you do not care about your immediate surroundings, the state will not provide any service. Banish the notion. If you are not willing to lift a finger to help your local school, to help your local pavement, to help your local whatever, then banish the thought that the state is going to rescue you. Yes, I know you're already paying taxes. I understand you. It's unfair. Life is not fair in Africa. This is something we're going to have to live with. It's something we're going to have to accept. But all of these things, as 1 in 44 just said in the comments, these things add up. Because responsibility, taking responsibility, yes, it's a burden. You feel like, oh my God, everything is collapsing now. I'm cutting the grass here. In a week, it's gonna be overgrown again. What's the point? Responsibility is freedom, and responsibility is power. The moment you take ownership of your local area, of your local school, even if the state still formally manages and owns it, the moment you take de facto ownership of your surroundings, is the moment we, it's a collective effort, is the moment we become more powerful than the state that is trying to collapse our society. But that does mean you're gonna have to, we are gonna have to start creating that power. It's not about owning guns. Big part of it is about owning guns. It's not just about owning guns. It's about cutting grass. It's about um, tutoring students at your local school. It's about cutting hair of people who can't afford it. That is power. That is taking power. That is a political act. That is an actual political act that means more than voting. You should still vote, but doing that is more powerful than voting. So the point very well made. David, you have a final thought there.
You think that attitude is linked in a way to a statist mindset? Because it's like, well, I'm not going to mow the lawn outside my apartment block. That's for somebody else. They must come and do it. The government, basically.
Yeah.
But and part of this is reality catching up. It's like, well, actually, they are absent. The government's not coming to mow the lawn.
Yeah.
If you want a nice neighborhood, you got to actually organize, make it happen, which is how nice neighborhoods have always been built since time began. But even the Roman Empire, with its sophisticated aqueducts and its roads, faced collapse. Entropy is a natural phenomenon, and if you don't keep entropy at bay, it will creep back. So you're constantly having to develop. And yeah, you can inherit some great infrastructure, but if you don't maintain it, if you don't have that attitude of taking responsibility, taking ownership, it's going to very quickly collapse and decay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I need to get going, but do you want to wrap up, Martin?
Yeah, doing so now. If I can just get, there we go. Yeah, so thank you everyone. SONA was a disappointment as always, as usual, as is normal. Don't expect anything from the South African government, certainly not the national government, certainly not your local municipality, unless you're willing to actually drag it kicking and screaming into the present. And that means you can't vote your way out of it. This is a question of real action. So yeah, don't put your hopes in the state coming to save you. It's simply not going to happen. And increasingly around the world, more and more people are realizing that the state is not going to save you. Even in some of the most developed countries in the world, people are now being forced to start doing it themselves, and that is a good thing. Remember, taking responsibility is a good thing. It's burdensome, it's uncomfortable, but it's a good thing. So that's kind of the view you should have on SONA. The state of the nation is in your hands as an individual. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed our analysis, please do remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Rational Standard. Click the bell icon if you want to be informed of our content as it drops. Please share this content with your networks. Visit the Rational Standard, rationalstandard.com, where you'll find our written work. We are primarily a written publication. Please restack some of those articles on Substack and also share them with your networks. And we will see you again next week. Gearing up to be a busy election year, I imagine. So we'll have a lot of new content to discuss, I am sure. Enjoy your weekend, everyone, and we will see you next Friday. Cheerio.